They all have really bad margin. They're all burning lots of cash. You're literally the opposite of all of those.
Because you're putting all the thinking in essentially false argument about the market.
What is the connection of the activity in space back down to the economy down here on Earth, right? Like we are no longer in the fully vertical era. We are now in the horizontal era.
Delian, welcome to EnduroSat.
Wow.
Now officially.
Thank you.
Now officially, after 6 years knowing each other, now finally partnering.
Oh yeah, finally made the investment happen.
Why?
So Q4 last year, I was just studying like the satellite market, and it was so clear that there was just like a ton of momentum, in it. And I had seen that all these US players were just like, clearly closing these big contracts. And so I was just like, look, this is an industry I know super well. It'd be crazy if I somehow missed like the satellite manufacturer. And I always had this thesis around like somebody's got to build like the Dell for manufacturing or for satellite manufacturing. And so in Q4, I spent a ton of time with a bunch of companies in the US, York, K2, Apex, et cetera. And each had their own sort of slightly unique angle, et cetera, big satellite, smaller satellite, trying to do, sort of mass manufacturing. But I still found that all of it didn't feel like it had this technological edge. And so, sort of pinged you, and I was like, okay, let me go check back in with Enduro and see what's going on.
The desperation hit you, right?
Yeah, but I was like, there's no chance, there's zero chance it happens. And yeah, on that Zoom, it was just like, look, you guys are clearly delivering at like a price point, at a quality, at margins, a consistency that is just like way beyond anything in the US. And so I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, I kind of was staring down the pipe, and I was like, I'm going to end up having to explain to my firm why I want to invest in the Bulgarian space company, and they're going to think I'm fucking crazy. And so I was like, I better do a lot of homework. So I was like, let me go visit in person again. Let me go check it out.
And just a prior history, because we know each other for almost 6 years, and I was enthusiastically pitching you the idea of EnduroSat maybe for 4 years. And the last times that you were calling me, I was in more towards like, oh fuck, this guy is not going to
ever invest.
I'm just wasting my time. And when you call and say, no, let me actually travel and check you guys. It was really strange, but I was excited.
But yeah, no, it's really exciting to see obviously the progress that you guys have made. The satellites have obviously gotten bigger, the revenues, the customer base, and it's just crazy because you break all the patterns of the typical space companies in America, where it's like they all have really intensive sales and marketing, they all have really bad margin, they're all burning lots of cash, and you're literally the opposite of all of those. I thought it was so funny earlier today when you're like, oh yeah, our US revenues grew 2x year over year, but we don't really know why, and people are just buying the components because they're really good, and we don't really burn anything, and we're growing really fast. And I'm like,
this was, it costed me a lot of time at the beginning, in the last years. It cost me a significant amount of time to understand what is burn rate as a terminology, because I was not a native speaker.
Exactly.
So I was like,
what does that mean? People burn money? Isn't the whole point of a company to make
because
money?
Because for someone coming from Europe, European Union is super conservative place. It's an amazing place. Culturally, I like it, but it's so dinosaur thinking about how we invest and how we make decisions. We were laughing with you the other day that between term sheet and a deal is usually 6 months for us. And you said no, for the high frequency companies and the more established players in the US is a decision taken in literally an instant. And
sometimes it's on the spot, basically. There's a story about how Green Oaks with Rippling, when the SVB crisis was happening, and they basically weren't sure that they were going to have the cash on hand to pay out all their payroll. They went to Green Oaks and said, look, do you want to invest today? And they basically negotiated, finalized the term sheet and wired all in 2 or 3 hours. And it's very prototypical of America versus I was surprised by the fact that from, when we signed the term sheet with you guys to wiring, it was still 5 months, even though I was trying to sprint as fast as I could, with American pace. But
no, we had a really incredible pace because, for example, in Europe, since we operate in Luxembourg, in Bulgaria, in Germany, France, everyone has a lot of holidays. So if you're tackling lawyers in different jurisdictions, it's really funny. But this is this is trade-offs from the other side. However, I really believe that what's the benefit of that is we've never had access to significant capitals early on, and it's already a 10 years old company where we are hardwired in our DNA. Listen, we have to make a dent in the universe via real meaningful products, and the only way that we can actually objectively exist as a company is to create such overwhelming value that someone would actually consider buying a component that is not necessarily
the American made, etc. established player.
And this is now helping us because therefore I didn't need to know what is a burn rate.
And the cash that you raise actually goes to much more productive activities where you're investing into capex production, etc., rather than just investing into the fact that your margins aren't there and you're losing sort of every single product.
If you have to bet in general about the future of space, I'm curious to poke a little bit in your brain in terms of and then if you want, I can share my also kind of maybe a controversial vision about it. But yeah, is that where do you think we are going? Like in the next 3 to 5 years, what would be like 3, 4 things that you have in your back of your mind? First, I mean, everyone knows, but you have one of the more successful privately owned companies right now in space. You guys managed to return as a first private entity 3 capsules from
back to back,
orbit.
baby.
It's unbelievable. Hopefully one day to be also with electronics from EnduroSat.
Working on it.
This is a different story.
Don't worry, we already had the discussion.
Let's keep the nepotism and focus on more on meritocracy.
We have a phrase at sort of Founders Fund, which is, if there is no conflict, we're not interested. So we like it. Trust me, the moment that our 4th and 5th satellite go off well, me and our CTO at Varda are coming here, and we're gonna do a deep dive and figure out, okay, how do we shift over more of our electronics over here?
But if you have to now look at like a broader scope, like if you have to bet and say, listen, those are like the 2-3 things that I really think it will be. This is what's happening. This is what's going to happen, and then what are the things that worry you most in the space industry right now today?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different sort of ways to tackle this framework. I kind of like that, like sort of Ben Thompson, this guy that writes Trajectory, always has this phenomenal framework on how when sort of early markets develop, the sort of only winners are typically these fully vertically integrated players, right? With something like sort of rocket launch and sort of Starlink, etc. There was nobody for SpaceX to partner with or buy from, right? And so they had to do it full stack, all the way from like the sort of engine production and development, all the way through to like sort of the satellite and sort of Starlink. Now, as you watch any industry mature, typically what you'll see is you'll start to see horizontal players basically start to come out. So you could imagine a world where, let's say 15 years from today, the FCC in the United States says, hey, the manufacturer of the satellite, or sorry, the rocket body and the operator of it need to be different, the same way that they did to sort of United and Boeing, basically back in the day, where those used to be basically the same company. The person that manufactured the aircraft was the same person that operated, and they said, look, that needs to sort of be decoupled. So there might be some government-led sort of horizontal layers, but I think what you're also going to see is, like, look, you'll start to see probably rocket engine providers, rocket body providers. You'll start to see people like yourself, basically satellite providers. You'll see people that just focus on the data layer, right? As these things become sort of more mature, you'll see these basically horizontal players, and in some ways Varda is this horizontal player that's just focused on like space manufacturing and reentry. And I don't want to build our own satellite totally from scratch, right? We already today are basically like assembling it from traditional components. We don't have to build it nearly as full stack as Starlink, but ideally we start to become more reliant on horizontal players like yourselves, that we can focus on our sort of part of the stack. So that's probably like the sort of shift that the industry needs to go through, and there'll be a lot of both consolidation, commoditization, et cetera, through that, right? Like in each horizontal player, there's probably only going to be 2 or 3 companies versus like, I think we were talking about it just earlier. There's like 10 different people that build satellites today. Yeah. I don't think there's going to be 10 different people that build satellites like a decade from today. Yeah. It's probably going to be 2 or 3. It's kind of going to be, sort of an oligopoly. So that's, sort of the shift in, sort of industry. I think there's a whole another framework that you can take to it, which is just like, what is the connection of the activity in space back down to the economy down here on Earth, right? And so I always like to categorize, sort of companies that operate in space in sort of 2 different buckets. One is like space for space, right? It's space companies that sell things to other space providers, right? And so in some ways, when you guys are selling components, that's what you guys are doing. When you sell components to like an Impulse Space or an Apex, et cetera, you guys are a space company selling to another space company. But sometimes you can see that start to become a bubble where it becomes this like, sort of interior economy where it's all a bunch of space players, selling to one another. Everybody's got revenues, et cetera. But then it turns out it's just musical chairs and there's no connection to the rest of the economy. So everybody's just spending each other's investor dollars, but then nothing connects. That's why you need the other, sort of half of it, which is like space for the rest of the economy, right? And so this is where, things like Varda, where we connect into the pharmaceutical industry, matter a lot. Obviously, some of your clients that are, directly just insurance companies or internet providers, et cetera, they're connecting into the traditional, sort of, Earth-based, sort of markets. And so I think, one thing that I'm concerned by is if you look at sort of dollars deployed in the 2 categories and where there's a lot of focus, you see actually sometimes I think too much focus on sort of space for space, where it's like, I'm going to make rendezvous and I'm going to make refueling and I'm going to make orbital taxis and I'm going to make, imaging of other satellites in space so I can track them. And it's like, okay, like, that only matters if the space economy is big, but like the only way it gets big is it needs to connect more into the Earth-based economy. So a lot of what I like your guys' activities is that like you guys really focus on democratizing access to space for traditional companies that connect into the rest of the economy. So if you're an insurance company, it's 1 click to make your own insurance satellite. Or if you're, United and you want to start a shift from Starlink to instead your own federated constellation, it's 1 click to sort of go make that, because that's what makes the space economy more directly connected into it. So Yeah, I think those are the two trends that I think about a lot, is this sort of shift from vertical to horizontal, and there'll be a lot of chaos basically during that. And then it's also like, how do we ensure that like the space for Earth is always bigger than space for space? Because if you just have this bubble in space for space and the investor dollars run out, all of a sudden that can contract really rapidly. Versus if there's the space for Earth, this is now dependent on being connected into the rest of the economy and providing real value.
Yeah, I think, partially I also buy this vision from a point of view we discussed with you multiple times over the years, but I think one of the biggest plagues in our industry, building satellites and even the new rockets, is SpaceX is an incredible already titan of an industry and innovator, but everyone started trying to replicate their model in their same way. And it's like playing against the Champions League finals against Real Madrid, trying to beat them at their own game with their own strategy. Like, good luck with that. And this always has perplexed me a lot, because it's like, first, when we talk about verticalization, I absolutely buy verticalization as a ethos and as a way of thinking, but only you have to verticalize, in my opinion, only and exceptionally only where is your added value, real added value. You should not verticalize for the sake of verticalization, because when I go to those conferences, which by the way, I don't go anymore to space conferences myself so much, fantastic innovators, or at least fantastic engineers, like great enthusiasm, but first they're in love with the technology, not in love with the actual challenge that you're solving, which is fundamentally making you sight blinded instantly. And secondly, they all try to verticalize. If you look through the industry, the first thing that these guys are building always is like a factory. And I'm always wondering, well, in a normal economic terms, mass manufacturing, which everyone talks about, means like millions or billions of pieces. Nobody needs millions of satellites today or in the next 10 years. Millions, I believe. And there is it. You start with the factories and with the logic, we build it and they will come. It's like kind of suicidal, because you're putting all the thinking in essentially false argument about the market. And there is somehow a lot of investors that are also getting overhyped. Oh, this will be the next SpaceX and the next SpaceX. And guess what? I think we don't need next SpaceX. We need asymmetrical players covering, like you said, and this is where I agree with you, like a vertical, concrete parts of the industry, ensuring that those verticalizations, only when they matter, connect with the actual non-space business on a very visceral and added value way, not just like for the sake of building satellites. I build satellites because it's important to have satellites. I build satellites because I have a new camera. You know what I mean? It's like everyone is passionate about
their technology.
Some very narrow-minded, although exciting currently technology, instead of being excited about the challenge. And this has always been my challenge to other founders in the industry, for which you can imagine I did so many friends. No, but I asked them objectively. I try to be very honest and transparent and ask them, hey, that's nice, but why are you doing that? It's not a self-purpose to build satellites or to build them at scale. It's just what type of problem you're solving. And with us, it was more from the get-go, I wish to connect non-space industries with space industries, and I see this fundamental problem. The infrastructure that everyone talks that it's already standardized, already easy to do, is actually not, because when you have to fly even today, 2025 year, satellite, it takes more than a year at best to get it to orbit. It takes a few millions. It takes like mission controls. It takes like navigation systems and operational setup and expertise people on the ground. It takes export, import. It takes the supply chain is infinitely complicated, even for a medium-sized enterprise. And then how the hell do you make data exciting and available instantly if every one of your units of cost as a unit of economic is so complicated? So we started not with the idea we definitely need to build a satellite with definite amount of kilograms and definite amount of performance, but we started, no, guys, the challenge is what type of cost per gigabyte from any type of space data could objectively open the gates of innovation of data consumer markets to a small, medium-sized enterprise level. And for me, this number, we crunched some numbers, we talked with a few industry players, and I realized, well, if we take actual case of $1 per gigabyte of any type of space data, radar, navigation, a high Earth imagery, and it's more frequent and easy available, I think it's a game changer for the industry. And then the question is, like you said, what are the verticalization efforts of different, very specific and narrow-focused technology gangster level companies in space that enable this future to happen in the terrestrial business? And most founders are getting excited about, I'm building the next Falcon 9. Why? Like, I don't like why. Like if you tell me, I have much easier way to get payload to orbit without the same acceleration of forces or whatever, like something that makes actual sense, it might be true. If you tell me
I'm just building the same thing,
I'm copy pasting SpaceX with a different logo, but also without the resources and also without the amount of work involved in it, I mean, I have a hard time to digest this will be a successful program.
Yeah, they're just learning the sort of wrong lessons. Like you can make the same argument with Planet Labs, where it's like, yes, Planet Labs when they started needed to be fully vertically integrated. They had to build the sensors, they had to build the satellites, they had to find their own launch, etc. That was what they had to do in order to get to market. If in 2025 you're starting like a company where you want to have sort of satellite data, I don't think you need to go that full stack anymore, right? Like we are no longer in the fully vertical era. We are now in the horizontal era. And so you can focus in on just your sensor payload, but the rest you should probably just be buying whatever is best in class, right? And flying an EnduroSat, sort of satellite. The other thing that I always find funny is when, sort of investors talk about, hey, there's like this, sort of defense use cases in space that are becoming much, much bigger. Anduril obviously really killed it in like terrestrial defense. Man, somebody needs to build like the Anduril for space. And my joke is always like, guys, there already is an Anduril for space. It's also called SpaceX. They have like a massive defense, sort of set of programs that they're working on. And so what is your edge there? Like, it's just like, I think not enough people ask themselves like, what is the edge? What is the unique thing that we do? Like, Varda has all of its, sort of challenges, trials, tribulations, but at the very least I know it's like we have a clear and defined edge and nobody else is doing what we do. And I'm not worried about like, sort of competition or SpaceX copying or et cetera. Like we have like our, sort of unique, lane. And so I think more people need to think about like, what is my unique lane, or am I just offering a commoditized product and I'm, trying to offer it at a cheaper price, but mostly it's because I'm erasing all my margins. And then it's like, well, why is any value going to accrue to you?
This is the other thing in the space sector, it's unbelievable how many different type of players who are again fantastic people. I don't want to diminish their efforts, but they're selling even undervalued, meaning that it's not even a business. It's like every sale that I do, I lose money. This is like really makes no sense, because economically, then how do you grow this to become an infrastructure of a meaningful size or effort? And if you look across the entire industry, incredible innovations that led to so many working well satellites in orbit. None of the constellations, maybe except Starlink,
I don't make any sense.
Economically, if you look at it, and if you forfeit that it's not a space company, but it's actually a data company, and if you look at it as from a pure, like a boring way of financial spreadsheet, suddenly you realize this has no future. Because financially, it burns cash and capital much more significantly than what it can catch up on a market. And instead of that, you can, if you're a data company, the other thing is that 90% of space companies are data companies. Their only revenue comes from data. And the question is, if you're an Uber, are you going to build roads and buy cars, or are you going to focus on the application? If you're Airbnb, are you going to build hotels and maintain stuff to service the hotels, or are you going to focus much more diligently on the service, on the application?
On the platform.
And I think we are coming to this fundamental shift of mindset. And if I have to bet, in the next 3 to 5 years, there will be literally 2-3 major infrastructure builders that just do the job good enough in Europe and US to put any type of sensor to orbit. There will be just a few players that can put to orbit any type of payload or a mass that is required. And there will be the rest of the industry will be pure data services, completely intertwined with what you just said, like to the data consumer markets. Not completely disregarding where this data comes from, which should be the case, in my opinion. Completely not caring about how this data is obtained to my application, just getting access to data stream that you can afford. And our goal is always, if we can do $1 per gigabyte downlink possible for any space data company on the planet, we are making the case that they could be profitable. And I think in the moment that these constellations start to be profitable, hopefully, I wish all of them are profitable, by the way, even the ones that are not going to work with the EnduroSat at this stage. But I really wish them well. I think this will be a game changer for the industry, because then you become a business that has much more opportunities, just hyping all the time and getting the money. Because even if you get 1 billion but you just burn it to the ground, what is the added value of that? I don't understand it. And this has been my clash with the VC world. Remember that I'm catastrophically bad in pitching. just to everyone, fully transparent. I talk a lot and I listen less. So catastrophically bad probably as a leader as well.
Exactly. It turns out you're building the company pretty well. Yeah, I mean, look, I think there is something to be said about. There's some risk here in that investors, I think, could end up being very burned by the like space economy because some of these constellations just like aren't working out. That even by the time you guys flip it so that constellations can be, you still need some amount of investment capital to sort of get those going and get them off the ground. And so does the industry shrink or does it grow at a much sort of slower rate because of this? Like I do think there is sort of real sort of risk there. People have been talking about a space bubble for a long time, and I think a lot of what's sort of buoyed it for the past couple of years is that just like SpaceX keeps doing well, but at some point investors are going to catch on to, if it's only SpaceX that's generating equity value here, at some point they're going to stop investing in anything else. There's some positive signs of like groups like Rocket Lab obviously sort of trading sort of decently well, but if you look at like everything from like Maxar to Planet to Iridium to EnduroSat, et cetera, it's like all these groups have basically been at like flat valuations for the past like 15 years. And so, investors are only going to be willing to hold the bag on that for, sort of so long. They're going to need to see other successes.
And the other problem that is just a physics problem. Every 5 years you have to replenish your fleet. And if you have harder and harder time to convince investors and in your infrastructure still costs billions, that makes dollar per gigabyte in thousands of dollars instead of per gigabyte instead of $1 or $2 per gigabyte, you have a hard time to get profitability and hard time at all to sell the data. And then you're reliant on one or two one-off contracts with some agency for strategic reason of defense, but that's not a business. That will never make a compelling business case on a scalability level.
Yeah.
And I think if I have to also challenge the status quo in the space industries, I really believe it's an industry that is already going in a maturity phase. I think there is this argument of new space is already gone. New space are companies that are as old as I am, so it's basically not anymore so new. And I think a lot of people would have to make hard choices. And in Europe, one thing that is actually a problem, here's a challenging thing. A lot of the companies in Europe, a lot of space companies, they only rely on pure contracts with their own space agency or the European Space Agency, which is actually respectable. I mean, the agencies and the European Space Agency is fundamental for the continent, but also a kind of detrimental because the idea is that these companies never get not even one singular other customer. They are not incentivized to create value or service or a product, and therefore their existence is like super expensive NGO type of operation instead of having a sensible market value. And then they go to the investors and they say there is no financing. We don't understand why nobody invests in us. Something is wrong on the market. It's one thing, and from the other side, the challenge in Europe is the skepticism of the investment world. In Europe, if you're not established and you're not really profitable, nobody would like to look at you. And the best case scenario is decision making in 6 months. When I came to you in the office and you called me and you said, listen, how about meeting the team? I said, yes, when? And he said, how about tomorrow? And I had to fly, and it was really an unbelievable experience, to be honest. And it was because I have the sense that these people were entrepreneurs, not VC type or financial accountants. Not that I have anything against accountants, but they were not accountants, which was a good thing for me, a relief. And then I said, the meeting stopped, and they said, okay, let us converse, let's just talk to the thesis internally, and we get back to you. And I was thinking in my mind, okay, maybe in March next year they call me. And then you called me before I was literally on the elevator down to the Uber, and then you remember that you called me.
I was like, we're ready to go.
And when you called me, I was the first feeling. I'm honest. The first feeling. It went that bad, like
that I had to call him.
Get 5 minutes to literally, this is my first feeling, And when he said, no, we are enthusiastic and we want to work, and I wanted to work with your team because I really like the asymmetry of the thinking. I like the boldness of the ideas that you guys inspire, and I like that you personally are outspoken. I don't agree with you on everything, but not at all. Nobody should.
Exactly.
In my opinion. But the idea is that I like that you have the stamina to be yourself, and that's authenticity. And when I think about Europe, for the last 9 years, every time that we had to speak with VCs, most of the time, it was exceptionally disappointing where they start the conversation with going in immediately to pure financials and asking me only about risks and what if it goes wrong. And in my mind is like, well, if it goes wrong, who cares?
We're investing in the upside, not the zero.
So this is the skepticism of Europeans. The benefit is that in Europe, I think we still have, especially in Central Eastern Europe, like incredible amount of treasure trove of talents.
Totally.
And we still don't
way
have
better
this.
engineers and physicists than we have in America.
I cannot objectively say better or worse, but I know that I can find them on the next street,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that they'll be eager to work, and I know that we're all in the office, and nobody complains that he's going to be in the office. And I know
And there's no political
and I
activism.
know
People
the
don't
office
see
is,
it.
is still a place where we actually build spacecraft, and we don't have table tennises and
Exactly.
whatever. And this is a bunch of a different model than
Totally.
few times that I experienced on the other side of the ocean. But what we are lacking is the optimism. Like
Totally.
everyone in Europe is convinced that the best case scenario for a company.
Even the journalist that we were just talking to, he like had such a defeatist question. He's like, well, like, we're only a country of 7 million. How can we do this?
But even the question has a negative connotation.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
they don't do it on purpose. That's what.
It's just the default mindset. And I was just like, why do you even come at it with this question?
When
just
we were hiring the first talents in US,
Yeah.
I'm sharing the vision, and they were, this would be amazing. We're definitely going to do it. And they get inside. They start thinking, how can we do it?
Yeah.
And this was so different, and it surprised me a lot when we started first hiring, because in Sofia we have the most talented engineers that we could find, at least for us. And most of the times they have at the beginning really hard time to believe in themselves, so they have objections why this would not work. So the mentality at the beginning is
default
this would default no, and this would not work. Here's why. And you can never win an argument if someone gets to the point of this not going to work, because you can have like a billion arguments why it shouldn't work, and there's probably one argument why it would actually work.
Exactly. I mean, this is what I think we do very well at Founders Fund, is just like we are default, sort of looking at the optimism. It's not to say that we're like not going to analyze the risks, but like the reason that we're investing is not because we want to make like a safe 2 or 3x. It's because like we want to invest in companies that are going to become 10, 50, $100 billion companies, and like you need to think through like, is that future potentially possible? We spend like 90% of our time on that, and then 10% on like, okay, and if things go wrong, like how does it turn out? But like if you look at sort of our returns and what defines them, it's the Airbnbs, it's the SpaceX, the Stripes, all the things that failed are like, a rounding error in comparison, and all the things that did like 3x are also a rounding error in comparison.
Yeah, so I think we can conclude with this note. Like, what would you like to see in EnduroSat's future in the next 2-3 years? If you're anyway, you're already part of the team and you already paid the bill, so it's too late for you to
change.
Tell me, but to change.
I think honestly, it's like leaning into a little bit of that American culture. Like, how do we sort of bring that like a little bit of optimism, enthusiasm, sort of self-promotion, sort of cockiness a little bit into the culture. Yeah. That's probably sort of one where it's like I think we should yell from the rooftops that we have the best satellites at the cheapest price, way more performant than anybody else. And the second is like I do think there's really something that you have the potential to be very special here, that you just become this like Bulgarian jewel that like becomes just like the sort of nation's pride, the way that like TSMC is for Taiwan. And I think that comes from like integration to the university systems, the high schools, the middle schools, the culture that you build here. And a little bit of it is, I was kind of joking with that sort of interviewer, but like I literally think the company should start thinking about in a couple of years, like how do we make sure that in the new space center there's like a daycare center that's like on the sort of ground floor, and that like we incentivize some of the fresh grads of like, look, like you need to have kids. The future of Bulgaria is our children, and like make it so that like I think I told you, but like within TSMC, their workers, the like TFR is something like 2.8 or 2.9, like way above replacement rate, versus the average for Taiwan is like 1.6. But TSMC is so big that they actually managed to outweigh the like rest of Taiwan basically. And so it's like, how can we do the same thing here, where it's just like inject that level of like optimism, dedication, belief in the future, not only into like Enduro, but like become a model for the whole country.
Yeah, I feel the same here. If we manage to convince the Europeans in general to be more optimistic, I think a few of the narratives in US are actually right, that Europe is a little bit stagnant, not innovating, and it's not because we have lesser people or we have lesser markets. It's just this we call it reasonable rational of thinking. Like, so we hide the fear of failure behind calling ourselves reasonable all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wish that we can help a little bit more unreasonable things to happen around that are hopefully positively impacting everyone. In terms of EnduroSat, what I would like to see absolutely is we need to get the capability of putting any type of sensor to orbit at a price that makes the data affordable, both first for our top tier customers, which is the space companies, but on a later stage, absolutely for the data consumer market. I wish that we can do that together in the next 2 to 3 years, and to be able to brag about how much exactly it costs, the gigabyte per data acquired by the EnduroSat Constellation as a Service or Space as a Service program. And the other thing is, I really wish that one day we started from a small attic apartment in the middle of nowhere, and everyone was laughing, but not because they're bad people, but because they were so deprived from their dreams that for them this was
unheard of,
incomprehensible. Actually, literally genetically incomprehensible. I would say in a non-racist way, like so hardwired in your brain.
Totally.
In a way that
we were made to be addicted to rakia, not to build big companies.
And the idea is that, and I was thinking on the other side, how come that another young person that I talk and I share, look, my dream is to revolutionize the way that we access space, and I really love the idea of building new type of space infrastructure. And he's looking at me, laughing, and I didn't feel bad about myself. I felt bad about them because I said, what could have happened in your life as a negative emotion or streamline of thought that is preventing you to even believe in yourself when you should have absolutely fiduciary obligation to yourself.
Totally, especially when you're young.
Yeah, especially when you're young. What the hell? Yeah. So if we can bring this idea that we started from an attic apartment, a huge skepticism, and the next generation would come, hopefully in literally less than a year, walking around one of the craziest facilities that we could have built with our own strength and hands and with your support. And a young person starting point will be much different.
Totally.
It will be decades of experience in orbit already. It will be mass production of complicated or advanced enough technologies. And when they say, you know what, I have an alternative asymmetric thinking about doing something similar to Starship or something as crazy as possible, it will not be considered as preposterous as when we started from an attic apartment building the tiny satellites.
Yeah.
And if we can do that together, this will be the greatest of things ever on a personal level.
Let's change it. Let's make you the Bulgarian sort of Steve Jobs, TSMC CEO, and you got the design sense of Steve Jobs. Very pretty office.
Yeah. Thank you for being part of the team. Welcome to the family.
Thank you.
And
thanks for having me.
Honor, and I think it will be excruciatingly painful, challenging, and exciting times ahead. And
I cannot wait. Thrilled to be along for the ride.
Let's try to build an industry game changer.
Rock on.